So what is my place in time? This picture shows you a place where people have crossed a river for hundreds of years. In today's times, why do thousands of tourists visit it each year and walk across that bridge? Is it because it's part of our heritage? Or is it pretty? Or is it just a good place to walk the dog? In the past, medieval traders walked their pack horses across this bridge on their way to the market fair to have a good time, while some others took their last journey in the other direction on their way to the gallows. So in reality, what we see here is a place that can have many different meanings to many different people at different times. We hope that by showing you how to explore and investigate evidence, you can go and help youngsters to learn something about the places that have meaning to them in today's world. During this project, we hope you can help develop youngsters to have good old-fashioned curiosity using good modern technology. We're trying to weave the two together and hopefully stimulate a desire to discover something about the past. But I have to stress right at the beginning that this project isn't just about investigating archaeological sites. It's about showing youngsters how they can investigate any place, any time, anywhere. Hopefully this will not only raise their awareness of the past, but also establish a feeling of belonging and increase the value of things that are still here today and encourage them to care about them and hopefully think about the future all at the same time. And in a way, we want to do it in a fun way. And we want to think about developing them as landscape archaeologists, as detectives. And we'll follow that process all the way through. This is a detection process, and we want to make it fun in that way, if you can, for your youngsters. Well, today we live in an increasingly digital world, don't we? How can we use the benefits of that digital technology to help us find about a place in time? Our aim is to show you some of those digital skills and resources that can help you shape a range of projects for your groups that will help and encourage them to explore and unravel the stories of all sorts of places around them. By uncovering these stories, youngsters will hopefully see everyday places around them as having value and encourage them to cherish and respect them in the future. Every place has a past and a story to tell. Finding that story using your computer can be as exciting as finding a bit of pottery from the past, and it's a lot easier to do. We want young archaeologists to learn how to be a landscape detective by choosing a place that has some special meaning to them, and for you to help them find what places might have meaning to them. Places such as where they live, ordinary streets, for instance. Local park. A heritage place, the places that they get taken by their parents to show them the heritage and get an ice cream, you know, those sort of places that we all got bored with when we were kids. It could be an industrial estate. Even industrial estates can have a past. They can have a story to tell, believe it or not. Or perhaps even just a curious brick wall you see on the way to school. These are all places in our everyday world. It could even be your favourite football ground. Mark will award a prize for somebody who can recognise which football ground that is, incidentally. Tell him in the chat at the tea break time. A place can be anywhere you like, and we want kids to undertake their own investigation of what was there, as if they are detectives, landscape detectives. We want them to use online resources to look at places in their everyday environment. These places that we see today are actually the archaeology of the future. It's a strange way to think about time, isn't it? But that's the case. We want them to think like detectives do and look for evidence. Now, whether we like it or not, the general public are still fed a diet that has to include digging. It's like look at that slide. It's like boars hunting for truffles, isn't it? Truffle hunting. Many archaeologists just feel they need to dig to see the past. You can get pills which can cure you, apparently. My doctor gave me some pills years ago and I've benefited enormously. They're little pink ones, by the way, if you ask your GP. But what the general public really don't appreciate is the cost of excavation and the complex logistics and the organisation that goes with it. I mean, for instance, you can't just pop out for a bit of fresh air, can you, and do a bit of excavation? Well, I hope not, anyway. And whilst we often see newspaper reports of objects being found during archaeological excavation, how often do we find reports of a new prehistoric village being found by just looking over a valley, like this one was? 32 roundhouses surviving as earthworks in that settlement in a field. Or a henge discovered while sitting in a house looking at a computer, like this one, which was discovered in a project I ran about 5 years ago, in which over 1,000 archaeological sites in the North Peninsula were discovered by volunteers using LiDAR. You can discover things without having to dig them up. But landscape detectives, which is what we're trying to breed in a way, they benefit from a much more variety in diet than just truffles and truffle hunting. Looking up and around you can provide you with as much more choice of food to feed the brain than just truffles. You can look at stuff. That's a very technical term, incidentally, looking at stuff. That's what I do I used to do for a living when I got paid, look at stuff. You can look at stuff anytime, anywhere, and without needing any complex or expensive logistics to do it. All around us, we can see evidence that tells us a story about the past and its people. Sometimes it might be small lumps and bumps like these that Mark is standing on. Or sometimes those lumps and bumps are bigger. And it's amazing how many archaeologists fail to see the obvious, that lumps and bumps above ground are as much archaeology as what you might try and excavate from below it. But who made those bumps and lumps, and when were they made? This process of asking questions, it's the first stage in actually being a good detective, and it's all about asking questions and being curious, and that's what we're trying to foster through this project. Now, to start stimulating that process of curiosity, we have to start asking simple questions about what we see and learning to look. We can show them that keen eyes and inquisitive mind, rather than a trowel, can be just as exciting and reveal just as much evidence as digging, for instance. The clues that we look for often turn up in unexpected places and can be found by carefully looking at our everyday world around us. For instance, in this slide, what time depth might there be on an average street? I hope you can see there's a stone wall with railings on it. It's cobbled lane. There's a new block of flats. There's a brick wall. There's time depth and there's stories in that time depth. Have they always been there? Did they arrive at different times? Who made them? What stories can they tell? Why is that bit of brickwork you can see why has it got different patterns and mortaring in it? I hope you can see, if I move my mouse, you can see that there are arches above some of those different patterns of bricks. In fact, what you're seeing are doors and windows. These have been bricked up, but once they were doors and windows into people's lives, people of the past. So, as well as using our eyes, we can use other things. We can investigate places using old maps. We can use postcards. We can use aerial photographs. We can use satellite imagery taken by drones and aircraft. And there's now laser scan data, LiDAR. And all these, crucially, they're available online and free of charge, which of course is very important because I'm a Yorkshireman and I thoroughly approve of things that are free of charge. Mark's from Lancashire, by the way. There is a little bit of a rivalry goes on between us two. So, while Sherlock Holmes didn't have the benefit of computers, he had curiosity. He's the archetypal detective, isn't he? He had the ability to ask questions. And these are questions, asking questions. It's a trait that we all have naturally, but sometimes that needs to be encouraged. Showing your youngsters how to find that evidence and how to piece it together will help get them started on their first case as a modern Sherlock Holmes, a landscape detective. So, what do we mean by a place? It's a place in time, this project, but somehow you have to start thinking about the term of place. It's a word we use a lot, but what do we mean by it? It can have a number of meanings. A place can, as I said earlier on, it can mean different things to different people, depending on their age and background, for instance. And I think your groups will probably need help in how you'd actually define a place. For instance, the slide I've got up there is the place I spent my childhood home in Yorkshire. It's a personal place. I define that as a personal place. It's somewhere special to me because I grew up there. A place could be a place with a name. Why is that place called Broadbottom? Well, I quite like the name Broadbottom. It's got funny connotations to it, obviously. It could only be in Lancashire, a place called Broadbottom, couldn't it? And I did a search on place names. I could only find one called Broadbottom, and it was in Lancashire. I apologise to anybody who's viewing, if they happen to come from Lancashire or from Broadbottom. But actually, a place is often a place with a name. But often we don't understand why a place is called that. Why has it got this name? And I think you can have lots of fun with place names, and that's an aspect of the project that you might want to give a lot of thought to. Sometimes a place can be just a quiet place. It doesn't have to be anything other than just quiet. A place where you can go for peace, just to have your own thoughts, for instance. It might just be a bus shelter. It doesn't have to be a piece of open moorland like this place that this photograph is taken. It can be a place that's important to somebody else. A place that's important in the past, perhaps. It's maybe a place that your mum and dad go. But as far as you're concerned, if you're a kid, it's just a pile of boring old stones. All these places can have different meanings to different people, and any place could have a completely different meaning depending on what your thoughts are at the time. What we have to do is try and encourage children to think that the past isn't always about archaeological sites with heritage themes and tea shops and pencils with rubbers on the end. You know the places I mean, English Heritage and National Trust type places, for instance. Everything isn't just about archaeology and archaeological sites. Sometimes there are so many interesting stories in everyday places, and it's teasing out those stories that we're actually trying to do. So we've defined places, but what do we mean by time? This is something else I think in my experience, I find we've got to really focus on. And I think I'd like you to focus on as well, is defining time. It's a very difficult concept, and I've found it often difficult to explain to younger people the meaning of time. For instance, children tend to think of it differently to adults. For instance, there's the present time, now, here and now. It only exists at this point in time, doesn't it? It's not the past, it's not the future, it's now. There's time that you can measure, for instance. I'll see you in 2 hours. That's something you can measure. You can monitor it on the clock. It's something that has a feeling that you can identify with it, and you can measure it. There's time that actually no longer exists. Roman times, past times. There's time, for instance, which is an expression of feeling, isn't there? We had a great time. We went to the fair. That was a great time we had there. There's actually time to remember, sometimes serious, thoughtful time, where we as adults, particularly, time changes. in the way, I mean, for instance, today, with the unfortunate, the Duke of Edinburgh's death, suddenly the world changes and people become very serious and thoughtful. It's a time to remember, Remembrance Day, World War I, World War II, and so on. These are all different concepts of time we have to think about when you're defining time in relation to any projects you might want the children to work on. In a way, I mean, how can we expect children to understand archaeological change over thousands of years? We talk about the Bronze Age, we talk about the Neolithic, don't we? How do you measure that time when you've only been alive for maybe 16 years or so? I mean, it's so difficult, and I think we have to think carefully about how we do define time. So what we're trying to do is help your youngsters in a way to think about their time. This is the computer age, and use this as the basis, as it were, to start thinking of an archaeological site as being any place that exists in today's world that they can start to use to uncover the past in measurable, time-stamped ways. I hope that's reasonably clear. Somehow we forget that time is so difficult to define for lots of children. So what we have to do is to try and encourage youngsters to explore the concept of change in their own place and in their own time, using the computer age to provide those snapshots. And I found that the easiest way to start that process is by using aerial photography that's been taken recently through agencies such as Google Earth, which is freely available to everybody, and old maps, which you can access to online and so on. These are all time-stamped records of places. So there's something that you can almost use as time benchmarks, as I like to call them. And these are the first strands of evidence, which I think we want our detectives to start working with and uncover. I would suggest that we start by using 3 time benchmarks, and we'll work initially in this step 1 training, which we'll talk about a bit later on, to these 3 time benchmarks that I'll go through in a second. And we'll use map and aerial photography evidence as that kind of focus to them. So first of all, we start off with now. The time is now. And on the screen, I hope you can see, this is a lovely place in Yorkshire called Morley. It's an industrial town full of mills, and at one time collieries. And the big red dot is my childhood home that I showed you the photograph earlier on. If we work back 100 years ago, a nice measurable time, this is about the time the Ordnance Survey 2nd edition maps were being produced. It was just starting to become an industrial town. It's obviously very different to what it looks like now. But 150 years ago, when the first Ordnance Survey maps were being produced, it was really just a very large village straggling out towards the south. Changed enormously, even in a period of 150 years ago. That change is dramatic in that period. And what you could see if you saw that map in a bit more detail was that my childhood home that I grew up in was in fact laid out over a medieval strip field, which curved like reversed S, ridge and furrow. And then that later became part of the grounds of a small country estate. There's a story just in my house that I uncovered many years later, which accounted for the number of artifacts I found when I dug a test pit in the garden when I was a young teenager. So there are stories everywhere, and using these 3 time benchmarks is a good way to keep a nice firm hold on this definition of time. Places and time can change such a great deal in even a short time. Never mind thousands of years, and this is what we're trying to reinforce, I think, with the youngsters in your groups. So, how do we go about choosing a place? And this is quite important. What are these places we're thinking about? I mean, as we said already, we can't and don't want to be prescriptive about what a place is. I can't provide you with a possible list of every circumstance of a place, But what we want you to do is help guide your youngsters about choice of places they might want to investigate. It doesn't necessarily have to be a pretty place or a known heritage site. It might be a very specific place or a certain structure. It might be something that's specific to your group area that has an identity with the geography of the area and the group that you work with, for instance. It might be something you could have a collective focus in. Or it might actually be a lot of different places, as you've got a lot of enthusiastic children who have places that have special meaning just to them and they want to find out about it. You could end up either having one thing as a group activity or lots of different things, but I think you might need to sort of steer your children to help keep it manageable. But this is the way that places are. They can be many and varied and have different relationships to individuals, for instance. However, if you stick to those 3 benchmarks, I think it'll help you lead that detective process off into the area of maps and aerial photography. And in the other training workshops, we'll allow you to build on that foundation and explore further back on time and using different resources as we go through it. So, for instance, you might end up taking a theme, perhaps something like you might work with another group on, perhaps you might think of twinning with groups or something of that sort of order. You might think of something like First World War camps, just a few examples here. Parks, perhaps. That's Greenwich Park in London. I hope you can see on the aerial photograph I put there. Can you see there are some circles in the park there? There's the Royal Observatory there. Those circles there, if you went down to Street View on Google Earth, you can see those circles are defined in mounds. That's an Anglo-Saxon barrow cemetery in Greenwich Park. Archaeology that people walk past every day and perhaps don't even give any thought to it. It could be anything in a local park, from an Anglo-Saxon burial cemetery to just a bit of a playground or some swings or whatever it is. There are all sorts of themes in parks that you can expand on and develop. It could be a zoo. Here's Chester Zoo, modern Google photography of Chester Zoo. And the important thing about the Google aerial photography, which I'll talk about later, is that you can see historic aerial photography on it. This is what it looked like in 1945. It wasn't even there. So things like zoos and parks and give you a possibilities of working together in groups. Almost everywhere has got one of these common landscape types of features, parks or something like that. Or it could actually just be a brick wall. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It can, the range is it's enormous. It's up to you to help define something about the features. Regardless of what you choose, hopefully this training will provide you with enough guidance to help you with online maps and aerial images that you can use for that research. So how can we help you to help your groups? What we're going to do, I'm just going to give you an overview now of the 4 steps that we're going to take you through with the 4 workshops between now and December. With each step, each way, we're going to introduce a little bit more as we go along and build up. And we suggest you try and build up a case file like detectives do. My son-in-law is a police detective, so we have quite interesting conversations about how you collect evidence and how you keep track of it. And building up a case file is the approach that detectives have. I just call it a desk that I chuck stuff on and it just piles up everywhere. But apparently keeping it in a file does help sort things out. I must learn myself as I go along, I think. But the first step is step 1, and this is where we are today, finding your place. It's a foundation step. And we want to ease you into the 3 main websites that we think you would get value from using with your group. And these really are covering aerial photography and historical mapping. In a way, this step also builds on any work the children may have already done at school, because a lot use Digimap for schools, for instance. And this will introduce them to other online map resources, which will help them understand more about history and archaeology and changes in places over time as well. Now, as not all YAC members or leaders will be at the same level of map or aerial photographic knowledge before they start this step, in a way, we have to start from base level, as it were. Now, I know some of you will be fairly proficient already, and some of you this might be your first adventure into this sort of approach. So in a way, we have to also learn at the same rate, as it were, and how to build up and manipulate the information online and skills base as we go through. But hopefully you'll bear with us in that respect, in that we're starting at foundation level and building up slowly and building up each time as we go along. So let's take a look briefly at some of the stages of the step 1 training. What I'll cover later in this session will be, in effect, 3 portals into the online resources. The first will be something called the Charles Close Society, and I suspect not many will have heard of that one, but this will give us a portal into modern mapping. We'll look at the National Library of Scotland resources, which is basically covering historic maps that we think will be useful to you. And the third is Google Earth, the aerial photography, but I'll cover those in more detail later. Step 2, which we will run in August, this is about how to find out more about old buildings and archaeological sites that might be around the place that's chosen. And we'll take you into more databases and how to search them and build up information about your place. The databases we'll look at, for instance, will be for England, the Heritage Gateway portal. For Scotland, it will be Canmore. For Wales, it will be Coughline. And for Northern Ireland, it will be a Northern Ireland Records Office information. And not forgetting the Isle of Man and also the Channel Islands. All these provide portals into information about history and archaeology related to working with maps. They're wonderful sites, and it's very easy to use. They're all very easy to use. With step 3, which we'll move on to in September, this will take you, I've called it delving a little deeper. It will take you into other areas where there's online information, which might help you get a feeling about the place and its surroundings. And there'll be a number of databases which are all searchable and all help understand places through time. For instance, there's Britain from Above, which is a wonderful archive of aerial photographs taken of all sorts of everyday places, streets, docks, parks, you name it. Lots of images which give you a feeling of an area in time from the First World War onwards in Britain from Above case. There will be the Magic website, which is a wonderful website for giving you access to information about the environment, where ancient woodland might be, where there are stewardship schemes running, where areas of moorland are. It's a portal into making places fit into a wider environment, for instance. There's also things like the online Doomsday, which give you a little bit of a time datum into the Norman Conquest, but it's a searchable map database. And one that the National Library of Scotland provide access to, which is called GB 1900. And this is another wonderful website. I keep using this term wonderful a lot, I know, but these are really exciting information sources if you've got any interest in the past. And the GB 1900 is an amazing database of place names which have been digitized and you can search. And they were taken from the Ordnance Survey 2nd edition maps, which allows you to search for any name anywhere in the UK and find out where those places are with the names, including even descriptive names, things like mills and so on. These are all databases which you can keep adding more information to your case file. And step 4 in October is what I've termed clever techie stuff, because I couldn't think of a better term to use. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. But what other information is available that isn't on maps and aerial photography? And in a way, this is designed to help appeal to slightly older members of your groups. And it allows us to move into the world of using laser scanners in this thing called LiDAR, which is an acronym which stands for light detection and ranging, which I've used for many years now. It's a wonderful tool for exploring the past, and it's extremely easy to use. It gives a general introduction, the step process into how to get LiDAR and how to use it. It is very easy to use once you've been pointed in that direction. Very easy to work with. It's really exciting stuff, and we'll see more about that in the digital tea break that Mark's going to run soon. But for instance, if you look at the image, this is a small village in Northumberland called Ogle. This is a recent image taken from Google Earth. You can see it's a small village, quite tiny, in fact, called Ogle, and a farm. But looking and using LiDAR, that's what you see. You can see all the earthworks in the field, showing you that the small village of Ogle is part of a much, much larger deserted medieval village. You can see all the lumps and bumps in the field of the tofts and the crofts and the village green, the lovely reversed S, ridge and furrow around it. LiDAR is so easy to access, it's so easy to use, and it's so informative. And it's because it's techie, it's a very appealing resource to use. Now, given the context of the time, of course, you want to get outside, and COVID has been a slight interruption to our ability to go out and explore. But whenever it's the right time for you and your groups to go out and explore, you can do that and judge that yourself. But all the information you collect, you can try and weave into visits to places, visit to the park, or just to a place, a brick wall. That brick wall might be a very appealing place to go, especially as we've been stuck inside for quite a long time. Are there any lumps and bumps in the fields or the park you want to examine? Have you found them on LiDAR? What was there? All these questions that people have started to build up in the case file. That group of children there, for instance, I was working with a National Trust. It was a World War I camp at Belton Park in Lincolnshire, starting to get down close to the ground to look closely at lumps and bumps. And finally, when you've completed all those steps, we'd like you or your group and the kids you're working with to send us a postcard from the past. Now, that postcard can be any medium you like. It could be a digital postcard. It could be a traditional handwritten postcard. You can remember how to write these days. It could be a video presentation. It could be a PowerPoint. It could be a voice recording, anything you like. And whatever format you decide to do it on, you could send it to the YAC website and it will be put on a digital display board, as it were. And as a reward, as it were, for the effort that you've all put in, what will happen is that Maya, who's here, is a landscape mole. This is a mole who's seen the light. She's decided she's sick of digging and she can see a lot more by exploring the landscape. And she's going to perform a lucky dip and will draw out a £50 voucher, which the lucky group who get the voucher can spend on any equipment they like for their group. And the voucher has been provided by the £50 voucher has been provided by the Epiarchum Heritage Trust to help us work with this on this project. So that's in essence an overview of the whole project. And in summary, I think it's important to suggest that you start working with your groups by asking simple questions, really, not trying to overcomplicate things, not trying to make big archaeological questions. Ask simple questions about the places you want to work with and keep your records in a case file. This keeps the theme of being a detective in place. I nearly said defective then, maybe that's a Freudian slip, a defective detective. You can use your phone, you can use your cameras to record things. You might have link up with the PhotoWorks project you did, for instance. There are different ways of recording all the discoveries you make. Simple questions about places. These are often the route map to finding out why a place is special to somebody. And that's, that's quite an interesting journey in its own right. Why is a place special to one person, not to somebody else? It's about finding out, being inquisitive. Is there anything that puzzles you about a place? That's often something you discover when you look at an aerial photograph, or about why does it look like that? Why is it curious? Does it remind you of anything else? Building up visual memories is something that children, in a way, need to be taken through the process. If you look at one thing, you can remember its pattern on a map, you can remember its pattern on an aerial photograph, and that can translate itself into a memory, which you then remember in the future and compare it to another site. It's all about building up on simple questions. And in a way, that's what we want you to do, is to focus on a place in time and help define that for your kids.